it also then leads to policy change. And at the end of the day, you are also trying in the advocacy platform, you try to also create spaces where these voices can represent themselves, because we know now that stories actually carry more weight than just like theories. So I would still contend that the missing voices of women are very important. The voices of women are still very important, and their stories, we have to find a way of bringing these stories, intergenerational women, not just the older women, but younger and older, having conversations together, creating spaces where these conversations can be translated into actionable advocacy points. And I think for whether it's at AU or whether it is at international forums like the world, the UN, these voices have to take an intersectional approach, because we are realizing now that it's not really just the problem of a patriarchal mindset. We are realizing that actually since the 87 and up, this question of the intersection of different oppressive systems come to play. And therefore, when we are doing advocacy, we cannot just say we will address sexism, but we have to take an agenda that looks at racism, sexism, classism, and all the other exclusive elements that have been used against people. So with that, therefore, I would want to suggest one of the areas that I think we really need to advocate on, and to really work out ways of how to thrash it out in a way that it becomes, it starts from the awareness raising, and it impacts the messaging, and it also goes into the curricula for training, as well as these the way in which you also bring people that actually embody that kind of messaging that you need to bring to the UN or African Union. And this focus for me is really healing of the traumatic memories that we carry as African people. And Viktor Frankl has three components that have been very helpful, I think, when we are talking about even how we can message our package, our advocacy tools. And this is really the whole respect of freedom of will. And the second one is a freedom to find meaning from whatever experience we have. And that's where the stories of people is very important as well. And then the third one is this element of finding meaning in every, that every life has meaning. And therefore, the importance of us to listen to every voice and to find ways of bringing those voices, critical voices, as critical to the conversation and advocacy. And so, yeah, so if we are talking about advocacy in gender and the healing of traumatic memories, so that really the intergenerational as well as the generational as well as historical traumas are addressed at its core, then we should be really thinking in terms of how do we make sure that actually different experiences of the Africans from the continent as well as from the diaspora are really enhanced in a way that there isn't one voice that is more important, because we live in a world where we have put classes, and we have actually also, we not just put classes, but we've also privileged certain voices. But here we are saying we have to make sure that each voice matters, and we have to bring these voices together in a way that they enrich each other, but they also keep on challenging each other, and they keep on transforming each other's voice as well. So I think I will stop there. Thank you.
Dr. Moya, thank you. I don't know if you see the bios that are in the chat that I've sent to you. I don't know if you want to introduce the other two speakers at this time.
I'm confused here. I'm sorry, I'm confused. I thought Fulata Moya was chairing this meeting. It turns out she's one of the presenters, is she?
I think there was some confusion about two different panels. Not to worry. We have our other two speakers here. And let me introduce them so that we can move along with the agenda. Thank you, Dr. Moya, for what you have shared with us. We are also privileged to have with us Dr. Michael Mcgorrain. Dr. Michael Mcgorrain is the co-founder of the European Network of People of African Descent, IMPACT, and board member of Black Lives Matter in Sweden, and visiting researcher at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights in Sweden. We're also blessed to have Dr. Amara Inya, who's a strategist, public policy expert, and social impact professional on city and state and city policy, as well as international affairs with expertise in Africa, Latin America, and Central Asia. She is the managing director of Diaspora Rising, a transnational advocacy hub that works to advocate, educate, amplify, and connect issues of concern to the Black diaspora around the world, I might add. So she's working in that space. We also know that with Dr. Inya, she is also a policy and research coordinator for the Movement for Black Lives, and is a strategy advisor for organizations and companies, as well as political campaigns and public sector institutions globally. Her work has connected her to the 6th region of the African Union Commission, an analysis of the African continental free trade area. These three speakers have spoken into already with Dr. Moya the issue of advocacy for Pan-African issues and concern. And I believe that Dr. Mcgorrain and certainly Dr. Anya will be able to bring their perspectives to this conversation. And Dr. Moya, we thank you for reminding us of the importance relative to women in this conversation. So in this moment, may I kindly turn the floor over to Dr. Mcgorrain, and then also then to Dr. Inya in that order. All of you are most welcome, and thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Angelique, and thank you, Fulata. And I'm wondering, Amara, if you would like to go first in the spirit of what the previous speaker was just talking about.
We're living into the moment, aren't we? Dr. Inya.
Sure, thank you.
I'm sorry, am I on the panel at all? This panel?
Yes, Dr. Mandaza, I'm very sorry. We'll come to you in just a moment. I'm sorry, there was just a bit of a delay of getting into the room and knowing who's in the room. We did know that you were in the room, but now we know you're in the room. So after these two speakers, you will come next, please, Dr. Mandaza. Thank you for your understanding.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Michael, for lobbing it over to me. And thank you, Dr. Fulata, for your opening remarks, which are incredibly timely and relevant, even to this conversation on multilateral international organizations and equitable international governance architecture. So I only have a few comments that I wanted to provide today, just as context for this conversation around multilateralism and what we are experiencing now, and as our work continues, where things can possibly go. And so my comments are organized around three major frames: amplification, alignment, and advocacy. When it comes to really understanding the role of multilateral international organizations, but more importantly, those of us who work on behalf of Black people around the world, we have to take into account the importance of amplification, alignment, and advocacy. And when I talk about amplification, it is really focusing on this notion of not making assumptions about what we know. And by we, I mean Africans around the world, the African diaspora, the global Black diaspora, what we know about each other, what we know about ourselves, and the level of understanding of the issues that exist on the ground. And those issues could be everything from state violence, which we are seeing in so many places, in Colombia, in Nigeria, in Haiti. We've seen examples in Chicago. We've seen examples of state violence. It could be issues of governance, and it could be issues of rampant inequality. And so when it comes to the three themes that I've chosen for today, the first thing is we have to amplify those issues of concern so that we are aware of the commonalities in our struggles, but also in the shared resources and the shared power that we have to address those issues that we face. And so it must be amplified. We're living at a time where we have many tools at our disposal to communicate things that we did not have 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We can't overlook the power of social media to allow the grassroots to amplify issues that would not even be on our radar if we didn't have access to things like Twitter or Instagram or other mechanisms that people are using to communicate with each other and to amplify issues. We know that even last year, with the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd, the speed with which that was communicated around the world fueled many of the uprisings that took place. So the importance of amplifying issues that are maybe local, but being able to amplify them so that there is awareness throughout the diaspora about the importance of that issue, it allows for us to connect and to recognize that we're not going through what we're going through on our own, that there are other folks elsewhere who share our struggles, but also who share knowledge about how we address those struggles. But we can't move forward if we're not aware. And so amplification is absolutely critical. The second is alignment. And by alignment, I mean not erasing the differences that exist throughout the diaspora, but seeking those specific things upon which we can build alliances and build strategies collectively. And so this is especially important with multilateral institutions because we have so many mechanisms. When we think of these institutions, it's everything from the AU, which has its Agenda 2063. It is the agenda at the UN. We recently had, in August of this year, the establishment of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, which was a huge undertaking, a huge lift to really have this mechanism that allows for the diaspora to work collectively to address issues of concern, because we recognize that we cannot do this separate or in silos. We cannot do the work that needs to be done in silos. So we have the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent at the UN. You have some of these legacy institutions that are implicated in some of the challenges that Black people around the world face. The IMF, the World Bank, these are the World Trade Organization. These are multilateral international institutions that require, if we are going to be effective in addressing the ways in which they have not perhaps lived up to their mandates or have been harmful to the concerns of the global Black diaspora, we have to be aligned. It means that we have to identify what are the key issues that we can build on collectively. What are the ways in which we can come together? I know, for example, with the Permanent Forum, there's a working group of folks from around the world, a couple of them, like Michael on this call, who have decided that it's important for us to come together as a collective to make sure that this mechanism actually can do what it was designed to do, what it was envisioned to do on behalf of Black people. And so that alignment is necessary. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything. What it means is that we can identify those specific things upon which we can agree and to move forward collectively with an agenda. So that's the important point on alignment. And then the last point is on advocacy. And our ability to be effective in our advocacy requires us to have clarity about the issues that we want to address. And our advocacy has to take place at many levels. We have to engage not just, it can't simply be, for example, grasstops organizations. We have to get the grassroots involved. Any movement, really, for it to have impact, that has to involve grassroots. And even when we think about these multilateral institutions, a lot of the challenge is that they are so disconnected from what's happening on the ground that their policies, they might be enacting policies that are harmful. We need to have that grassroots pressure on these institutions to ensure that they can comply or they can actually address the issues that are of importance to the Black diaspora. And so our advocacy also has to put pressure at the top with governmental agencies, regardless of country. We know that there are specific roles that governments are playing right now that are, there are ways in which they are harmful to the masses. And in order to hold these multilateral international organizations to account, we have to apply pressure from the bottom, from the grassroots, as well as at the top. And so that is how we can have effective advocacy when we think about the challenges that are front and center. So I think for me, I just wanted to leave it there. When we talk about multilateral institutions and the role that they play, at least in our work, amplification, alignment, and advocacy can ensure that we don't operate at the whims of their agenda, but that we actually are able to push our agenda in these spaces so that we can get the outcomes that Black people around the world deserve.
Thank you so much, Dr. Inya, and thank you, Dr. Mcgorrain, for your kind regard in this moment. Let's take it over to you, and then we will introduce our fourth speaker, Dr. Mcgorrain. Thank you again, Dr. Inya. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Angelique, and thank you, Amara, for those words, and also Folata. And let me begin with just some spontaneous comments to what Folata opened with, which is critical, and that is the point of equality, including gender equality and intersectionality. And I would say its relevance, as you pointed out, its relevance to Pan-Africanism. And, Pan-Africanism is mostly about equality, in the sense that Pan-Africanism, as it has been historically conceived and practiced, has mostly been about equality, justice, liberation from colonialism, liberation from racial forms of oppression, and so forth. And equality is at the heart of all these struggles and aspirations and strivings. It is at the foundation, ethically, politically, legally, philosophically. There is no justice, there are no equal rights, there is no anti-racial discrimination anti-colonialism, and so forth, without equality. So if we are to be Pan-Africanists with integrity and consequence, we should also, of course, be pro-gender equality and the equality of all peoples. And yes, so gender equality should, for that reason, be at the heart of Pan-Africanism, and also for the reason of course, including everyone on equal terms. So I am grateful to those remarks, and this is an ongoing conversation, and was, for instance, a very important conversation that was had at the Pan-African Conference in Tanzania in 1974. And is an ongoing conversation. And Black Lives Matters movement has lifted this conversation, I would say, to the next level with its emphasis on intersectionality. And speaking of equality, this is also at the heart, or ought to be at the heart, of multilateral, international, global institutions. It's supposed to be the foundation of the UN Charter. It's supposed to be the foundations of all human rights documents, the foundation of democracy, and so forth. Unfortunately, in reality, equality is not respected in any consequential manner in the international institutions of global governance, such as the UN, the World Bank and IMF in particular, and also the World Trade Organization. And all these institutions are in need of reform in order to be more firmly based on equality. So for instance, the World Bank and the IMF, as we know, are dominated by the so-called developed world. And the leaders of these institutions are not democratically elected or nominated. They are nominated by developed countries, and the presidencies are always inhabited. IMF, always someone from the US, World Bank, almost always someone from, IMF, always someone from Europe, and World Bank from the US. And also in terms of voting and so forth, developed countries are completely dominating these institutions. They also dominate the UN. We have the Security Council, of course, and veto and so forth at the Security Council being completely dominated also by certain countries. The General Assembly also being dominated both diplomatically, but also in terms of the resolutions, which resolutions are passed and how they are passed, and most importantly, which resolutions are realized and implemented and acted on once they are passed. So to take an example, since 1974, for each year, there has been resolutions being passed towards the establishment of a new international economic order, where newly liberated so-called developing countries in the early 70s called for a global economic system that was not based on colonialism and the, if you will, exploitation of the developed world of developing countries, but was equitable and based on principles and rules, regulations, and laws, international laws of equity. And these resolutions that are passed every year in the General Assembly since 1974 are never acted on. And they have never been acted on simply because the developed countries do not want to abide and do not want them to be implemented. They do not want an equitable international order. They do not want a democratic international order. So these are, of course, grave issues that should concern us all as Pan-Africans and people who are concerned with issues of equity, fairness, and justice. Yes, there's much more to be said. I think now with the establishment of the permanent forum of people of African descent at the UN level brings us some hope to be able to raise these issues and other issues at the international level, and to also amplify, as Amara mentioned, amplify the voices of people of African descent and allow people of African descent and grassroots representatives to advocate for the rights and interests and equality and justice for people of African descent. So far, though, there are not enough funds available and have not been made available so that civil society from across the world can be present during the sessions. So far, there's only funds for 25 representatives from across the world, civil society representatives, which is nothing. We need a situation where there's funding for hundreds to attend each annual session. So there's much work to be done, and there's more to be said, but I've maybe said enough for now, so I'll hand over the word to Mr. Ibo Madasa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have reincarnated as moderator of the session. So thank you so much for your remarks, Michael. And thank you for the issues that you raise regarding lack of equality among institutions, and also lack of resources for civil society participation. We will go on and introduce the third speaker. Dr. Ibo Mandaza is a Zimbabwean academic, author, and publisher. He holds a doctorate of philosophy in political economy from the University of York in England. And he has taught at the universities of Botswana, Zambia, Dar es Salaam, and Zimbabwe part-time. He has researched and written extensively on issues of governance, international relations, public policy, and was one of the first senior African civil servants in post-independent Zimbabwe in 1980 to 1990, having been a member of Zimbabwe National Liberation Movement in the Department of Research, Education, and Manpower, ZANU-PF headquarters, Maputo, Mozambique. He served as director of the National Manpower Survey and permanent secretary in the Ministry of Manpower Planning and Development. As deputy chairman of the Public Services Commission and member of the Defense Forces Commission, and finally as chairman of the Parastatal Commission before his early retirement from the civil servant in July 1990 at the age of 42. So Dr. Ibo Mandaza, the floor is yours. Welcome. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like just to make present two segments in my presentation. The first is the context of this meeting, and to thank the organizers of the AAD for this very important initiative, which really reminds us that we have had a lacuna, a gap in the long history of the Pan-African movement, and that in many respects this does fall in the context of trying to revive the Pan-African movement. And I think we need to remind ourselves that the Pan-Africanism is both an ideology and a political movement, political and economic movement, whose objectives are twofold in the current conjuncture. The first is to restore the dignity of the African person after centuries, 500 years of slavery. First of all, European expansion, victims of European expansionism, trans-African slavery, colonialism, and in the current situation, neocolonialism and its racism component. And secondly, that Pan-Africanism must be seen as a political movement, an economic movement, to ensure that Africa and its diaspora take its requisite place as an equal partner in world affairs. And therefore, it appears to me that the manner in which the African continent and its institutions, multilateral institutions, has dealt with this diaspora has been very piecemeal, almost tokenism, whether it's the AU and before it the OAU, and indeed even at the UN. And the blame for that itinerant, uncoordinated and tokenism is the blame has to be placed on both sides. The African continent, especially in the post-independence era, when we expect to have had a much more spirited program of one, Africa acknowledging the history of the Pan-African movement, which began in the diaspora, and the contribution of the African diaspora to the national struggle for independence. This is one theme which has not been highlighted in the post-independence era. It's almost as if those we revere, and rightly so, people like Kwame Nkrumah, were really a product of the Pan-African movement, and fall in the tradition of Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, who as people have almost forgotten, was part of the Ghanaian post-independence experience. Frantz Fanon was given the ideological fervor and overarching influence over the years for most of us at my age anyway. Frantz Fanon was almost the Bible for Pan-Africanism. And my late brother Walter Rodney, with whom I worked, for his, and we need to remember all these persons. Having said that, the theme that the ties that bind, a famous South African scholar, Bernard Mcgorrain, wrote a book, which I think is still relevant, particularly in the context of this discussion, entitled "The Ties That Bind," the relationship between Africa and its diaspora. Regrettably, the relationship between African and diaspora has tended to be too romantic, as I said earlier on, and itinerant. Even though, as I've just stated, there's been this immense contribution of the Pan-African movement of the African diaspora. But also we've had, in 1975 in Dar es Salaam, the 6th Pan-African Congress. It was very important. Held it was in Dar es Salaam at the height of the struggle for national liberation in Southern Africa. And therefore, the liberation movements of Southern Africa, all of them participated in that 6th Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam, 1975. More recently, and in one in which I was involved, the 1994 7th Pan-African Congress in Kampala, Uganda. it was a momentous occasion. One felt so proud to be an African. It lifted the specter, the reality of Pan-Africanism in this era to greater heights, where we had Malcolm X's wife present, Kwame Ture, his last meeting with us was there. We had virtually every part of the African diaspora represented at that meeting. And we had this brilliant Nigerian, Tajuddin, as our Secretary General, 7th. The records of the Pan-African, 7th Pan-African Congress has been published in a book entitled, after the theme of the 7th Pan-African Congress, Organize, Don't Agonize. And this, I think, is important in the context of this meeting. The 7th Pan-African Congress appointed myself as the convener for this 8th Pan-African Congress, which was to be held in Zimbabwe in 1998. Political events in my country overtook. And since then, the Pan-African movement, at least of the Congress that I'm talking about, became splintered, if also because a mistake was made in housing the Pan-African movement at State House in Kampala, and virtually almost died there. And therefore,
Prof, sorry, we are running out of time. I'm sorry. Can
yeah,
you tie up your...
Not my fault, because I think there were many other statements before. But I want to be very brief on the second part of my thing, is that the way forward is institutionalizing the African diaspora relationship. And in my view, this is important beyond the multilateralism that have taken place. We don't want to remain itinerant in our discussion. I think it's important that we establish a home for the Pan-African movement, in addition to the various institutional arrangements that might emerge out of this meeting. On our part, in Harare, we are establishing the Pan-Africa University, focusing on the reform and transformation of the state in Africa, but also with academies, institutes and schools to reflect the history of Pan-Africanism, the Kwame Nkrumah Academy on the study of Pan-Africanism, Franz Fanon Academy for Theology, and so on and so forth. So we hope that these are some of the things that will be discussed in the parallel program that's taking place, where my colleague Adebayo Olukoshi is speaking. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sorry that the time really has not allowed us to delve deep into all the important things you are raising. We have 2 minutes before the breakout session is over. I don't know if there is like last remarks that Michael and Amara want to say after Professor Ibo's input.
Amara, you go first, please.
Sure. So I think I definitely want to first appreciate Dr. Ibo's historical context that he brought to this conversation. I think it's incredibly important to really understand, particularly when we talk about the Pan-African movement and its origins and some of the key players and the philosophies that undergirded the movement, as well as connecting it to where we find ourselves today, with hopefully expanded tools to continue that work, but still having fidelity to the ideals of some of the earliest advocates and some of the earliest standard bearers in the Pan-African space. And so I really appreciate that. I think as we move forward, for us, it's incredibly important to understand how we have to evolve to ensure that our work is effective and understands how these multilateral institutions are evolving. In many instances, the goal is to perpetuate and maintain the status quo. And so we have to keep that at the forefront of our minds so that we can be out in front of the advocacy work that needs to take place, and we don't find ourselves out of step with what's actually happening.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to leave us with that charge, recognizing how these institutions evolve so that we can be prepared and effective as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yes, thank you. So I'm grateful for the comments that have been made, and I think it has made for a rich conversation with different perspectives. I also appreciate Dr. Mandasa's historical perspective and wealth of experience and practical experience and knowledge of Pan-Africanism. It was very interesting to hear. So yes, let's continue the conversation, and let's continue struggling for equity and justice.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the time limit, but I know many people would have wanted maybe to ask questions. But on the chat, there is a link to how to go back to the plenary session. So thank you so much to all our three presenters, and the richness of the conversation. The time limit is unfortunate. Thank you. Meet you in the other
Thank
session.
you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Angelique. Thank you, Amara. Thank you, Folata.
Yeah.
How we will get, but we know we will. We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will get there.